So I just finished the Freakonomics podcast on misadventures in baby making. Always a fun topic. The topic of the hour is abortion. And it was the first beginning of the podcast was talking about the unintended consequences of different things about baby making. Those being the first part of it was really more, instead of about abortion, was really about the involvement of the ultrasound machine, and how the unintended consequence of the ultrasound machine is that it gives the people the ability to know the sex of the child before it's born. And in overpopulated countries like China, where they have a one-child policy, there's a tendency to have more males, and of course, where are all the females in that population? In other countries similar to China, it turns out is that people are finding out the sex in advance, and they're aborting all the females. And it's not all of them, but it's a disproportionate amount. It's anywhere from 8% to as high as like 75% increases in abortions to females. So that was the first part. The second part of it was about, well, of course, if people were aborting over the sex of their child, what about aborting over, disorders, mental or physical disorders, or any other type of disease or syndrome or something like that. If people had that ability to do a test in advance, would they? And there's a test, that exists now, a neonatal test where they inject a needle into the woman, and they can test essentially, if there's any genetic disorders. And they said that, there's a 1% chance that there will be something wrong with the baby. There's also a 1% chance that the test will actually kill the baby. So most people actually opt out because they're just like, this is our child. We're not going to risk killing them over just to find out something. So this guy named Stephen Quick, he invented just a blood test that you can do without actually injecting a needle into him. What I did like is his perspective on why he did this. Was, I get the two things that I thought were interesting about it, if I can remember both of them. The first one is that he realizes that there was so much stress over uncertainty that he just wanted to eliminate uncertainty, and he wanted to eliminate, this concern over, doing a test that might actually end up harming the baby. So he came up with the blood test, even though the consequences of it might result in people choosing to abort their child just because they find out it's not going to be perfectly healthy or normal by today's standards. He also, I thought the other perception was, he thought it would be self-correcting, which I thought was interesting. His view is that, conception's so difficult to begin with that people, even if they did find out the sex of the child, or not the sex, but the health of the child, people would still choose to have the child, even though they know something might be medically wrong with them, such as that the child has Down syndrome. Even though, in a way, I guess he was kind of optimistic and hopeful that people would actually, it would give them an opportunity to remove the uncertainty, and they would begin preparations for that child. Before the child's there, they would make preparations, getting support and therapy, learning more about how to deal with children with Down syndrome and something like that. So, I thought that was really good, and he's essentially inventing a tool. The tool itself is not wrong, and in that light, the tool is actually very beneficial. So Stephen Quick, I thought that was an interesting perspective on technology and its uses, and potentially its unintended negative consequences. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, just because abortion I find is fun to talk about, because it seems so, one, it's such a hot button issue, two, it is inevitable that you're going to have your moral position comes out when you try to address that question. And mine's complicated, like a probably a lot of people's. I'm a Christian, right-leaning, I guess, in that regard. So, I'm against abortion. But if you were to ask me, the question, when is it okay to kill a baby in the womb? Because that's what abortion is. You're killing a baby. Let's not use terms like terminate, end, or abort. Be honest, you're killing a person. You're killing a person. When would it be okay to kill a person is a better question to ask, because that has other consequences outside of just abortion. You have to talk about, when, issues like euthanasia is another. I find the topics actually go hand in hand, and what surprises a lot of people is actually, I'm for euthanasia, but it's a little more complicated, because euthanasia, I'm for the fact that if someone wants to willingly take their own life, they have the right to do that, and no one else can stop them. Whereas abortion, you're actually taking the life of another person, whereas in this case, the parent is taking the life of the child. So if you have the situation where you have a child that's going to be born with a terminal condition that is going to be fatal, that is going to invoke a lot of suffering, is it the right thing to do to end that life in advance? That's a very, very difficult question to address. I would pray that I, would be willing to take on whatever difficulties that I might encounter, just out of my faith in God and in respect for life. Whereas, could I make that judgment call and make other people make that decision too, based upon my position on life and how it should be treated in relation to euthanasia? So I don't know. That it makes it a lot more challenging. But to address the question of when is it okay to kill a child in utero or in the womb, I would say the first and easiest one for me is if it jeopardizes the life of the woman. I would make an exception for that, and that would probably be almost the only exception. And again, there's that gray area over the terminal conditions, sufferable conditions, not just terminal, because there's always hope. One of the things I always view about faith is that it's the absence. A lot of our decisions are the absence. When you take a strictly pragmatic approach, it's the absence of any hope, the absence of faith, that, the only outcome is the negative, and that's all you see. But to address that from a Christian perspective, why I would say it's actually okay to take the life of my child or any child if it jeopardizes, if the woman's life is in jeopardy, is because, and a friend of mine actually pointed this out, is that if you had to choose the life between your child or your wife, who would you choose? And he said, without a doubt, I would choose my wife. As in, I would save my wife, you could take my child. And he said, and the reason why is because I made my vows to my wife. I didn't make my vows to my children. I love my children to death. I would do anything for them. If I could die in my place, die in their place, I would. But if I had to choose between one or the other, I have to choose my wife over my children. And I agree, and I think that same's true with the fact that the woman comes first before the children. She has to, if you have other children, she needs to be there to support the other children as well. And that's an extremely difficult position to take in this. And again, it's one of those very rare situations where, again, Jim, what is that? Aren't you just then proposing the outcome, the negative? Would there ever really be a case where the woman's life is in jeopardy? And I would say, it's probably extremely rare. But I think it does happen. My mom is actually a case where her mother was very ill. She was running a high temp, and the doctors even said, if we don't take the baby now, your wife is going to die. And so they made the decision to take my mom. And she was, I don't know how far along she was. She was in the unheard of, at that time, where what they do with the babies is they just basically put them on the side to die. Essentially what they do a lot of times with, I guess, terminal children in other countries is you just put them on the side, let them starve to death and die, which is horrible, but that's essentially what they did with my mom. But for whatever reason, she lived longer than what they were expecting, and then I guess at some point they decided, well, we got to do something. The baby's not dead yet. This is wrong just to starve a child. So thank God that my mom did live, and that I'm here. So it's guess it's one of those things where I'm a pragmatist in many regards, but abortion is one of those issues where, you know, I'm not strictly a pragmatic. I go with whatever is the best solution, or trying to achieve an end. You know, and Stephen Levitt, in his book Freakonomics, he talks about the issue of abortion, and he was just showing correlation. He wasn't saying that we should kill abortion's good because it reduced poverty, and that was what he showed in one of his chapters in his book, was that after Roe v. Wade, abortion spiked to the point of like basically a quarter of all births, not just births, and pregnancies result in abortion. So basically, a third result in, or you know, 3/4 end up actually being birthed, and 1/4 ends up being aborted. And he was saying that, you know, the correlation between unwanted children typically results in crime, and that all of a sudden you had all these, you know, criminals who would have been never came about because they were aborted. You know, some people could actually look at that and say, wow, that actually is a great idea. You know, give people the freedom to kill their children, and you eliminate that, you know, consequence of having, you know, unwanted children and having criminals later on in life. Of course, you can, you know, if you stretch that, you go on those same paths. It's kind of like, well, you know, what about killing people of lesser intelligence? What about, you know, even, I mean, that's why the whole Nazis were, people were so frustrated and pissed off about them, is because they were killing off other races simply because they viewed one race as being superior to another. And everyone, of course, most people would say that's atrocious. But you know, if you take just a purely logical stance, to some degree, there's, you know, if you come from an amoral perspective, you know, there's a logical position in terms of at least promoting healthy individuals and intelligent individuals, and promoting society that way by essentially, you know, killing off all the others. Of course, obviously, there's going to be, you know, unintended consequences if you did that route. A lot of, you know, this is one of my arguments about, you know, what if we had the ability to genetically modify our children in advance? You know, we wouldn't even have to have abortions. We could just modify them before they're ever born. One of the unintended consequences might be is that through our trials and difficulties in life, a lot of people develop strong characteristics and strong character from that. A lot of people who are born with disabilities develop very strong, almost in a way, their ability to overcome those trials makes them who they are. And so what would happen? Would we lose those people that face extreme, you know, trials and difficulties in life, and that are able to overcome them and become superior individuals in many regards than, you know, their normal counterparts? And then, of course, the other people are like, who the heck are you to say that we should stop people from having that option? So, you know, it's hard to say. So anyways, that's all my thoughts regarding, you know, abortion on 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. So, happy day.